From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Stripe to lay off 14% of workforce while others freeze. Thomson Reuters leaks 3 terabytes of sensitive data. And Lockbit still dominates ransomware. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Marcos Marrero, the CISO at H.I.G Capital. Marcos, thanks for being here.
No, thank you for having me, Rich. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. We will dive into the news in just one moment, but first we have to thank our sponsor, Votiro. Prevent and identify UFOs with Votiro Cloud. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. Go to CISOseries.com, hit the events drop-down, and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. If you're into counting, it's the third one down. Just click on it to join us. We will see you here. We've got about 20 minutes, though, Marcos, so let's jump right into it. Our first one here, as we alluded at the top of the show, Stripe to lay off 14% of workforce. The digital payments giant, which was valued at $95 billion in its last funding round, is cutting its headcount by about 14% as startups try to navigate a tough investment market and rush to rein in costs. Founders Patrick and John Collison stated in an email that they had been too optimistic about the internet's economy, near-term growth in 2022 and 2023, and underestimated both the likelihood and impact of a broader slowdown. So, Marcos, added to this, we have some other kind of staffing news. Amazon has paused hiring for corporate roles. Apple has reportedly paused almost all hiring, potentially through late 2023. We're just starting to see Twitter doing its round of layoffs post Elon acquisition. Hearing more of these stories daily, do you see this as further damage from COVID, or are there other reasons for this turnabout?
I think it's a perfect storm, Rich. When you really look at the post-COVID world, right, in that post-COVID hangover, we all expected an economic downturn of sorts to materialize and really manifest itself. And I think that kind of failed to really come out in the way we all expected it to come out. So I think we're definitely seeing this from the COVID point of view, and this is part of again that post-COVID hangover, and just really kind of working through it, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, it makes me think all of these companies, I think of Amazon particularly, where they were forced to expand so rapidly in so many aspects of their business overnight. And the only way to meet that overwhelming demand would inevitably snap back when, we decided not to just live entirely online. So yeah, you're right. It's a little bit, I feel like, of paying the piper with COVID. And then obviously, the supply chain is part of that and impacting when it comes to when we're talking about other tech companies looking at, Intel kind of tightening their belt, AMD, NVIDIA, all those companies kind of on the chip side and the supply side kind of hitting on the other side of that as well.
Yeah, I think the supply chain definitely plays into that, and the rapid growth, like you said, of a lot of companies having to hire workforce or expand their workforce considerably to then go ahead and service their customers, and now that's starting to contract. Right, we're starting to get back to a normal, and it could be where it's just that we've hired too many people, and we've got to readjust.
All right, our next story here, Thomson Reuters leaks 3 terabytes of sensitive data. The research team at Cybernews has found that the media giant left at least 3 of its databases open and accessible for several hours, including the 3 terabyte public-facing Elasticsearch database, which contained a trove of sensitive, up-to-date information, including Thomson Reuters' plain text passwords, ouch, to third-party servers from across the company's platforms. The company recognized the issue and did fix it, downplaying it, saying it affects only a small subset of Thomson Reuters' global trade customers. Marcos, question here is that remaining open for a number of hours. On the one hand, we've seen much worse, but it seems like a long time for that
Yeah.
amount of data from inquisitive computers who are looking for these types of things to open up. Thomson Reuters seems to be downplaying the severity, identifying just a small set of customers. How does this sit with your instincts?
It's disappointing, and it's really mind-boggling because this shouldn't have happened. This is very much technology and cyber hygiene. Why were plain text passwords stored in an Elasticsearch database? Number one, and number two, how were those databases publicly exposed with no access control? That should have been caught, and this shouldn't have happened. This is really mind-boggling, and you can even, to a certain extent, argue negligent in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, Thomson Reuters, it's one thing, and not to excuse like startup that had a viral app that collected a bunch of data and was this is Thomson Reuters, right? I mean,
Right.
like if someone is going to have those controls, it's going to be a giant firm like them, right?
Exactly. I mean, if you're talking about governance, right, change control, for example, right, would have maybe not, right, depending on how they have it set up, should have caught this, right, before being publicly exposed. And that's the type of organization you absolutely 100% agree with you have that in place.
Do you expect any kind of transparency in light of this kind of I want to call it almost a breach of trust at this point? To would that assuage your concerns of an organization like this?
Absolutely. I think we're starting to see more and more consumers actively taking into account the negative cyber press that an organization may experience in the decision making and that factor of, do I want to be their customer? Do I want to engage with them? Do I want to procure their services? And I think we're starting to see that from both corporate and personal.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that. We'll cover that later in the show. Next up here, Lockbit dominates ransomware. This is according to Deep Instinct's 2022 interim cyber threat report, and Lockbit accounted for 44% of all ransomware campaigns in the year so far. This compares to 23% of campaigns attributed to Conti and 21% to Hive, so Lockbit bigger than the other two combined. The report also corroborated trends we've seen in 2022, things like threat actors increasingly turning away from the use of document files to spread malware to using link or LNK files, other archived email attachments to be the vector now. This comes as a result of Microsoft disabling macros by default in Office documents, one would assume. The report also predicts a rise in so-called protestware over the next 12 months, with organizations self-sabotaging its software to weaponize it as malware. I mean, Marcos, a lot of things in this report. What kind of stands out to you? You know, the Lockbit market share, new trends in
Yeah.
malware vectors. You know, what stands out?
The Lockbit market share doesn't surprise me a bit. I don't think we have not really made a dent in the ransomware industry as a whole. So that market share won't surprise me if it keeps increasing. And Lockbit's market share, just skyrockets from here, just continues to grow. The trend on LNK files doesn't surprise me either. Bad guys they're gonna pivot and they're gonna shift. Cybercrime is a business, and they're gonna do anything in their power that they have to do in order to be successful in their business. So that doesn't surprise me that they're pivoting over to LNK files. Microsoft disabling macros. My hat off to Microsoft. They've done a fantastic job, I think, over the years, over the last several years, in really turning that monolithic organization into an agile organization, right? I mean, they're pumping out features and enhancements in their cloud environment faster than you can keep up. So, hats off to them, right? On really breaking down that threat vector right at the initial stages, which is those macro documents, right? And making that, a thing of the past. Protestware is a new one to me. Just kind of a crazy one. I mean, yeah, okay, sure. Let's just sabotage and weaponize our legitimate. But it's just mind-boggling.
That does remind me a little bit of stuff we've seen with the software supply chain when it comes to open source, where someone gets a hold, of a legitimate, they become the legitimate maintainer of something, and then they poison the well, so to speak. But yeah, on a commercial aspect, I mean, that certainly is new to me too.
Yeah. That's extremely new. I mean, almost on the heels of it's almost ideological
Yeah.
to a certain extent, right?
So let's hope we don't see that take off like ransomware, because ouch, that would
Yeah,
not
that
great.
that would be a bad one. That's apocalyptic at that point.
All right, next up here, Dropbox breached. I know this one made quite a few headlines. The popular cloud storage provider has stated that threat actors gained access to one of its GitHub accounts through a phishing attack. This led to the theft of 130 code repositories containing credentials such as API keys used by its developers, although no customer accounts, passwords, or core code were accessed. You know, Marcos kind of reminds me of the Thomson Reuters story we just talked about. Looks more than just a break-in at a single company, given the popularity of Dropbox as, your go-to shadow IT problem/solution. It makes the story a little bit like one of those movies where, a lab technician drops a vial of contagious spores on the ground and mayhem ensues. I'm curious, how does it strike you?
Uh, Disappointing also too, and very surprising. Especially right phishing attack. Okay, I mean, if it was a targeted phishing attack, okay, there's a possibility that could have made it through. But there should be a bunch of other controls, especially with a company like Dropbox. Modern, born in the cloud. You would expect them to have security very much embedded, right? Because they understand the importance of it, or you would hope they understand the importance of it. Um, in their organization. So it sounds like a lot of failures and a lot of different controls. And GitHub had to notify them, and they weren't aware of it. Wow.
Yeah, that's the one that stood out to me. Now, not to just to play devil's advocate here. I maybe Dropbox would say, I think this is evidence of our controls that no customer accounts, like we segmented the risk so that if this does go down, our business model is not impacted, our customers are not impacted. Like I can see that argument. I still agree, though. Disappointing for that
Yeah.
GitHub had to notify them.
No, absolutely. And I mean, if you read into the details of the story, names and emails from a few thousand Dropbox employees. So yeah, I'll protect my customers, care a lot about them, but the employees, not so much. Yeah, let them take their information, type of thing. So
we'll give you credit monitoring. Don't worry about
there
it.
we go. Exactly.
All right. Well, before we move on, we have to spend a few moments with our sponsor today, Votiro. UFOs are everywhere. They're in your applications, files, cloud storage, endpoints, and emails. That's right, UFOs, unidentified file objects, are hiding in files across your organization. UFOs can contain malware that exfiltrates data or deploys ransomware, and 70% of UFOs can't be detected by traditional scanning solutions like antivirus and sandboxing. That's where Votiro comes in. Votiro prevents UFOs before they hitch a ride in on files, without detection and without slowing down business. Do you believe? Learn more at votiro.com/UFOs. That's VOTIRO.com/UFOs. Next story here really caught my eye, a call for more ransomware reporting. Now, listeners, if you're tuning into cybersecurity headlines every single day, as you should, it may seem like we cover quite a few ransomware attacks out there. They're getting reported all the time. We kind of highlight the biggest ones. But according to the National Cybersecurity Center annual review for 2022, that's coming from the UK, many ransomware events required a nationally coordinated response in the year. But getting a handle on the true scope of ransomware remains problematic due to spotty reporting. The lack of reporting gives attackers more leverage to demand payment for not leaking exfiltrated data, even with little guarantee that cybercriminals will keep their word. They are cybercriminals. Rather than something to be hushed up, the report recommends that organizations treat cybersecurity as a genuine board-level risk to be managed. Marcos, why do you think companies choose to hush up rather than report? It seems like, it's not just, quote unquote, a few bad apples. Seems like it's kind of the rule unless you have no other choice. Is it brand management or something else?
I think it's a fear of the unknown. What is the reputational impact, and the financial and legal and whole host, right? Name your issue, after that they're going to experience, and I think this is a lack of incident response planning, tabletop exercise. When something bad does happen, here it is from A to Z, 0 to 10, everything we have to do and what the potential negative ramifications may be. It's the type of thing where we got caught with our pants down, brush it under the rug unless we have to tell somebody, and we move on from there. Sadly, it's the state we find our industry, and I think it's a matter of time before that starts changing, and the sentiment starts, shifting more towards more transparency and more information sharing. But I think it kind of it sort of stems from that, and a lot of this is also based on my conversations with peers and colleagues of mine, right, in other organizations. Um, it's that battle of understanding cyber risk in the business, and the board, understanding what cyber risk is, and that they're responsible for it also.
Our next story here, cyber incident at Boeing subsidiary causes flight planning disruption. Jepson, the wholly owned Boeing subsidiary that provides navigation and flight planning tools, confirmed on Thursday that it is dealing with a cybersecurity incident that has caused some flight disruptions. The incident is at the very least impacting the receipt and processing of Notice to Air Missions, or NOTAMs, which are notices filed with aviation authorities to alert pilots of potential hazards along a route. Marcos, if this is ransomware, as at least one journalist I've seen covering this believes, it reveals once again the weakness of an infrastructure where bad actors don't just have to go over big names like Boeing, but instead can eat away at their supply chain. In this case, a subsidiary. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about this particular story?
This is the worst feared sort of situation that us as security professionals knew was going to materialize at some point. It just hadn't happened yet. When we're starting to see the actual physical impact and real world impact of these ransomware attacks, we I think we all first saw it, with Stuxnet. Right, it was an actual, weaponized cyber attack that had a physical implication. It's only a matter of time before we start seeing, which it already has, right? But nothing that I'm aware of that's very national or global news, where it starts hitting from a medical point of view, right? And if we have actual, deaths that are caused by this, and loss of life. So it's our worst fears. We knew they were going to materialize at some point, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, and it seems like threat actors are obviously identifying where they can have these almost kind of butterfly effects, right? Where you don't need to disrupt much in flight schedules to have a massive
Yeah,
impact on an industry. Same thing with medical. You don't need to disrupt there, like, there's loss of life, always the possibility there. So obviously, the threat actors aren't doing this in a vacuum. They're targeting these things where the least, they can make just a small impact and have a huge outcome as a result. So
no,
so
absolutely. I mean, and we've seen them, with the Kaseya breach, right, and
yeah.
SolarWinds,
Hmm.
right? They say this is where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, and they're doing their homework. Like I mentioned earlier when we start talking about ransomware, is that cyber criminals are not organized. They're doing their homework. They're doing the reconnaissance, and they're really strategizing. Where is it that we have to hit? It's not a shotgun approach anymore. It's very sniper.
All right, well, moving on here. LastPass warns of security hubris. The password management software company released its fifth annual Psychology of Password report, must reading in my book, which looked at password behaviors among professionals across age ranges. It found a disconnect between confidence of secure behavior and actual practice, particularly in Gen Z. They were the most confident in password management techniques, but were the most likely to use a variation of the same password across sites, relying most on memorization. 65% of all respondents said they received some cybersecurity education, but of those saying they received that education, only 31% stopped reusing passwords as a result. Almost all respondents, 89%, recognize reusing passwords as a risk, but only 12% use different passwords on different accounts. Marcos, aside from Security Hubris being a great name for a band, it seems to present some troubling facts for an industry struggling to keep things secure. Why do you think that people of any age or generation have problems with passwords? Is this just characteristics of passwords in general? They're problematic in general.
They're problematic in general, and it's human nature. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how old you are and what generation you belong to, right? There's certain password practices that you're going to implement, and that are part of your DNA in how you use passwords and work with them. Some better than others, but at the end of the day, the problem is passwords, right? Microsoft is one again, right? That's very much leading the forefront on this, right? With
Yeah.
passwordless, and really getting to a point where we do remove passwords from the equation. We need to attack this at the root, and it's going passwordless as much as we can wherever we can. And until we don't get there as an industry, we're going to continue to come across this problem. As many that are listening, and for those that work in this industry, uh, identity is the new perimeter, and that's where the focus has to be.
And our last story of the day, most customers would leave a retailer after a data leak, kind of alluding to what we were talking about earlier. According to an Akamai survey of UK customers, 59% of respondents would leave a retailer if they suffered a major cybersecurity compromise, and the same amount of respondents, or at least the same percentage, said they would advise friends and family to avoid the retailer as a result. I guess what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Just under half of respondents, 49%, said they don't trust retailers to keep data safe in general, regardless of a breach. So Marcos, this response from customers seemed to reflect more of this security hubris, especially given that abandoning a retailer after a data leak maybe is, I don't know, closing the gate after the horse is bolted from the barn. It also reflects maybe the legitimacy of hushing up breaches as discussed earlier, or at least I could see a business making that excuse for maybe saying, hey, I don't want to lose those 59% of customers. I'm curious, what is your take on this survey?
I'm not surprised. And we mentioned earlier, I think we're hearing about cybersecurity more and more in the mainstream, right? And more of mainstream consumers that are not in the technology or cyberspace, are starting to understand this a bit more, and they're starting to see what the impact is of a data leak or data breach on their personal information. Heck, they may just get frustrated because after a data breach, they start getting a bunch of spam emails or calls, right, on their cell phone, and it comes and goes in waves. And I think we've seen correlations to that, as an industry. So what can they do? Power's in their hand. Leave that retailer. I will no longer have a relationship with you anymore. And until that really starts really cementing itself within senior executives and executive management at those retailers, and that really starts driving down cybersecurity and the importance of it and that message to the rest of that organization, to really button that up, and reduce the risk of this happening. This is what we're going to continue to see.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, Marcos, was there any story that you reacted strongly to today? A thumbs up or an eye roll or something just stood out to you in the rundown today?
Major eye roll for Dropbox and Thomson Reuters. That should not have happened.
Do better, guys. All right. And Marcos, where can people find you online? And are you hiring?
Yes, we are hiring, and you can find me online, LinkedIn, Marcos Marrero. You can search for me. I should pop up in those searches, hopefully, in case if LinkedIn's mad at me, probably won't. But simple Marcos Marrero search, and you should find me on LinkedIn. Get in
All right.
touch with me through there.
Well, thank you so much, Marcos Marrero, the CISO at H.I.G Capital. Phenomenal. Just truly a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you also to our sponsor, Votiro. Prevent and identify UFOs with Votiro Cloud. A reminder that there is no episode of Super Cyber Friday or this show next week on account of Veterans Day, but you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. And you can now subscribe to the show through a newsletter on LinkedIn. There you can read and hear the show all from our newsletter. Just go to CISO Series page on LinkedIn to subscribe. Until next week, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.